I really wanted to focus on the budget and ask you to respond to the criticisms that you have not taken perhaps seriously this upcoming budget deficit, and that you have downplayed the severity of the potential deficit.
I've been involved in the state's budget either directly or indirectly for 25 years. As the chief executive officer of the state, of course I take the budget seriously. What I don't do is wring my hands and squall to the top of my lungs that we're going to have to go raise a personal income tax, or we're going to have to raise people's taxes to keep government at a certain level, because I don't believe that.
How bad do you think the deficit's going to be? Because Susan Combs isn't apparently going to give you an update until January. Maybe you are looking at other financial information,
Right.
And if so, I'd love to hear about that.
I will use Senator Ogden, who I happen to think is one of the brightest, most capable, knowledgeable people, and he said somewhere around $10 to $11 billion is what the workable shortfall, and it's not a debt. We don't have debt in Texas. That's what they do in Washington, D.C. We do balanced budgets. We have a constitutional amendment to balance a budget. And your choices are pretty simple. Are you going to reduce spending, or are you going to raise taxes? We're going to reduce spending if I'm the governor.
So you think the gap is probably about half of what some of these other numbers that are floating around?
I'm using what Senator Ogden has, the idea that everyone is trying to pinpoint 5 months away, 6 months away from when that budget will be written, exactly what the resources is, I think is I think it's an exercise that's not particularly productive. We have a comptroller. If Bill White, all he wants to talk about is the budget is this, he should have run for comptroller. The governor is about making executive decisions, about working with the members of the legislature.
You take pride in having a lean state budget. It was lean when you came out of the last session. It's lean going into this one with this looming, whatever the number may be, gap in front of you. Pundits, some of whom you may not agree with, believe you can't cut your way out of this. Do you see any new sources of revenue? You said you wouldn't raise taxes, but do you see other sources of revenue that might supplement the budget?
There are a lot of pundits who consider themselves to be experts who say that we have a lean budget in Texas. I don't necessarily agree that Texas' budget is all that lean. I think we have an appropriate budget from the standpoint of the services delivered that the vast majority of the people of the state of Texas want. And I do not buy into the premise that you cannot reduce the spending and continue to have a state that functions.
Your opponent says we would be in a better situation if you'd been a better planner. He says, first of all, he would have been asking that the current budget be trimmed long before January when you sent the letter out, you and the other leadership sent the letter out asking for the 5% cut. He would have been cutting the current budget sooner, and the second thing he would be doing is monthly getting forecasts, acting on those forecasts. He thinks you're waiting too long and that you haven't been proactive.
Two things. If he wants to be the budget forecaster for the state of Texas, that's a different job. It's called the comptroller. He obviously ran for the wrong job. He needs to run for comptroller, not governor. And the other side of this is it's rather rich from my perspective. A fellow who wants to run on all of this business acumen that he has, and he left the city of Houston in horrendous debt, and even the current mayor is seeing now how much debt the city of Houston has because of the inappropriate way that he was using pension funds to pay off operating debt. All of that's in the public record. So a fellow who doesn't have the greatest record for operating the largest city in the state of Texas, I think it's rather rich for him to be pointing to the state of Texas. We are inarguably one of the best run of the big states. When you look at our debt as a percent of personal income, It has not grown. As a matter of fact, it is the same today as it was in 1998 before I became lieutenant governor, 1.4%. So all of this rhetoric that comes out of my opponent's mouth doesn't side up very well with the truth.
Public education is a very big part of our budget. Can you assure the educators of this state that public school spending will not be cut in the next session?
Yeah, I think so. I go back to 2003. It's a priority. Our state's still growing. As a matter of fact, we put $1.8 billion more into public education in the 2003 legislative session for the following biennium than we had the previous biennium. This is the same time we were cutting $10 billion out of our budget in spending, reducing spending. And so education is a priority.
There's been a lot of discussion, not just in Texas, but nationally, about something that the Wall Street Journal calls the second wave. And here in North Texas, for example, the city of Dallas is getting ready to lay off. We don't know yet because they're going to increase taxes to cover costs, but it could be up to 400 people. City of Fort Worth, several hundred people. Counties, 50 here, 100 there. And then the state is going to have to come to grips with, budget fiscal responsibility too, and there may be, and I would suspect will be, layoffs at the state level. Does this raise a level of concern that a second wave of unemployment greater than the one we have now is on the way, not just for us, but elsewhere?
Trying to write the budget 6 months before it's time to write the budget is a bit of not a good exercise. So the idea that I'm going to stand up and say, these are the agencies and we're going to cut this number of jobs. Everything's on the table. It always is, every time.
Let me just ask you a little bit about your methodology. In January, you and the other leadership asked for the 5% cut in this biennium. You've put agencies on notice that you want them to cut their bottom line another 10% going into the next. On a day-to-day basis, I know you're not on a day-to-day basis sort of micromanaging this, but what are you doing in the interim to monitor or to influence spending and to sort of keep your self-engaged?
Kind of the civics lesson here is that governors make appointments to all of those boards and agencies, whether it's the Board of Regents at of a university or whether it's the Health and Human Services. All of those individuals who have been appointed know what the drill is, that they need to be looking for those places to make reductions. They're going through that same prioritization process. Mike Morrissey, who is one of the brightest budgeteers and has worked in state government longer than I have, 25 plus years of being a budget expert. Mary Catherine Stout, who is our budget and policy director, they on a daily basis, and I would suggest to you multiple times daily, are talking to agencies, to agency heads, to the other individuals who are involved in the budgetary process. They're talking to legislators, and so there is an ongoing dialogue about the budget. It's always the most important thing we do. I think there was a former lieutenant governor, his name slips my mind now, but who once said that after the appropriating of the money, everything else is just poetry. It's the most important thing we do every session, whether you're in a budget surplus position or not.
If you're leading by example and the budgets will have to be cut, what would you do with the governor's budget? How would you trim any expenses there, and do you think is there room for more efficiency?
What we have done already. We made the reductions in our operating budget for the last biennium and made those reductions of over 5%. And going forward, we have reduced the governor's budget by over 11%. So I'm practicing what I'm preaching.